You're listening to Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits, a podcast that encourages you to love more on your friends and to further consider the issues that may plague friendships. I'm Alysa Lucas, and I've got a funny story to tell you. So school's back in session, and I'm teaching a class where we were talking about verbal and nonverbal communication. Verbal communication, of course, being the spoken or written words, and then nonverbal communication essentially being everything else. Your appearance, how you say things, your tone of voice, that would be included there. The gestures you make, so on and so forth. So we were doing an activity where students were going to go around in a small group and they were going to tell someone what they communicated based on their nonverbal communication. So as a way to start the activity, I was like, okay, you go with me first, all right? Based on my appearance and nonverbal communication, what would you say about me? And so I think one student was like, you look like you read a lot. And I was like, it's probably the glasses. And then someone was very specific and said, you look like you shop at Kroger's. And I was like, Kroger's is a fine place, but I very much enjoy Meijer. And if there was a Wegmans, I would bypass Meijer and go straight to Wegmans. Love it. But the one that got me in the entire class in stitches was the student who said to me, you look like you'd be a loud crier. Like, what about me says that I would be very loud in my sobbing? And not saying that there's anything wrong with that, because if it's that true emotion you're feeling, then I say go with it. But I would say on a general basis, yes, I'm a crier. I don't disagree with that. In fact, I have a system. I cry, I get mad, and then I do something about it. It's worked for me for many years, so I'm going to stick with it, I think. But actually, I think I'm kind of a quiet crier, and when I do cry, though, it's noticeable. Like, you can see the tears in my eyes, around my eyes, and my nose get red and blotchy, and, obviously there's the physiological response, so I'm sniffling and all sorts of things going on. So it's not to say that people wouldn't see me or feel me crying. I just don't think they would hear it down the hallway. So I think that, I've certainly cried in appropriate contexts or in contexts that probably weren't appropriate. But one of the things is I know I have experienced for sure is that my crying has impacted the mood of an entire room. And I can tell you that for sure. That is something that I've experienced. When you're around someone else who's experiencing emotion, they can impact you with their sadness or anger, frustration, or even happiness, right? You're in a bad mood and someone comes in and they're like, oh my God, and you just get so excited, whatever they're excited about. There's something contagious about their excitement, but there's also something contagious about someone's sadness and their crying. And so that really led me to think about, has this happened to you? Where you are having a particularly fine day and someone's sadness impacts you, your mood completely changes and it impacts how you chat with people or how you approach the rest of your day. I think this is something that we don't think about a lot, but we should. And so I'm very glad to welcome back Lance Bennett from the University of Iowa to talk about this phenomenon called emotional contagion, which is important considering that our experience of emotion can be influenced by others, like a friend's experiencing a wide range of emotions for many different reasons. So let's go ahead and chat with Lance, see what he's up to lately, and get ready for all my nerdy questions and scenarios that I have about emotional contagion. But I think that Lance and I have a great conversation about what we don't know, what we should know, and some other things that we might want to consider. Hi, Lance. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. It's good to talk to you again. So some people might be reminded of your name. They might go, that sounds like a familiar voice, because you were one of the first recordings that I did for the podcast last November at the National Communication Association Conference in Dallas.
Yeah.
And so it was great to talk to you. And we talked about some jealousy, which is a topic that I think is both near and dear to both of our hearts. And for those of you who've listened to it and might want to go back and do a re-listen, or those of you who haven't listened yet, it's episode 16, Keep Windows Open and Respect the Walls. And in that, we talked about your research, and it was with Dr. Jennifer Bevan. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
That paper was with Jennifer Bevan, who's a professor at Chapman University in California.
Side note, I always wanted to go to Chapman University. No particular reason. I think I got something in the mail for them, and I'm like, that looks cool. And I've never been. Yeah. I should go visit her.
Yeah. Yeah, they're a solid school.
Yeah, I hear it looks nice. And I believe one of my faculty members that I had in graduate school, Michelle Miller Day, is also at Chapman University. So I got lots of friends there. I should go say hi.
Absolutely.
But that episode, we talked about the research that you and Dr. Bevan did, where you talked about jealousy and romantic relationships where a partner had a cross-sex best friendship. And so I think we had a great conversation, lots of things to think about and consider, and you gave some great advice for people. So I think that's a good episode to revisit. But now you're back.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm back in action.
You're back in action. So I thought we could start by you talking a little bit about, in general, what your work is about, and then we'll go into your new work that we're going to be talking about today, which is emotional contagion. So why don't you give us an update or a reminder of what work you do?
Yeah, so essentially, if you listen to the jealousy episode, you'll find that my work has changed over the course of time. And so
that happens.
Yeah. And so essentially what I do now is I still study emotion and interpersonal communication. However, I don't study a particular emotion necessarily anymore. Rather, I study more emotion concepts and emotion processes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so specifically, I'm starting a line of research on emotional contagion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so essentially that's what it has come to right now, is trying to understand how we can examine this construct from a communicative standpoint, and the things in which how we engage in communication with other people, how it actually leads to impacting other people's emotional state, right? And so how we transfer emotional states from one person to another. Yeah. And so that's what it has come to.
Yeah. Well, and I think that is something that happens in research, is that we sort of develop we start a program of research, and jealousy is an emotion. So it's like, you started there and then moving to seeing sort of what impact it has. And my understanding of emotional contagion is sort of what metaphor I have in my head is sort of like a zombie apocalypse. Is that fair? Right? Like, so there is a disease, and if you get bitten by the zombie, you then turn into a zombie as well. And I would see that emotion contagion is this idea of infecting other people with our emotions. So we sort of bite them, and they might take on our zombie state of whatever emotion it is. That's sort of my thought. Why don't you correct me or support me in your thoughts, or how you define how emotional contagion is defined by researchers or by you yourself as you're working on this topic?
I think you're right. I never thought about the zombie metaphor though, but that's really good though.
Thank you. I like The Walking Dead, so
it makes perfect sense. And so essentially, you're right in that we have these emotional states that come from different stimuli that we experience in our social environment. But, when we oftentimes pass these emotional states on to other people during the course of interaction. And so the idea that, that you can be sad about something can lead another person to be sad about something when just by talking to them or sharing your experience with this other person, right? And so researchers in the past, folks like Hatfield, have examined emotional contagion from a primitive standpoint, essentially saying that we as human beings have the tendency to mimic other people's facial expressions, body language, and postural states, which can be either a conscious or an unconscious process, such that you're in a crowd and you see a crowd doing a wave, right? So take Iowa City, for example, right?
Yes.
If you watch football, you know that at the end of the first quarter during football season, people in the stadium wave to the children in the children's house.
That's so cool. Right. Okay. As a reminder, Lance is at the University of Iowa, which is in Iowa City. So tell us a little bit more about that. I just wanted to get that out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so apparently that situation started, if I'm correct, like as like a joke, saying like, I want to wave to the children. Like someone posted on Facebook, I'm going to wave to the children in the hospital at the end of the first quarter, essentially to show my support for the children who are going through these rough times. And it became a whole thing, right? And so people started doing it. It got national attention.
Yep.
And even other teams started doing it too at their respective schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so emotional contagion to me functions in a similar way,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
While it can be a conscious process, it can be very much unconscious too.
Yeah.
And so when we look at our behavior, either at the interpersonal level and at the group level, we see that things like that do occur.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did was I looked at, the emotional contagion literature, and I said, like, okay, one could argue there's a lot of nonverbal communication being explored through this thing.
Mm-hmm.
What about the role of verbal communication?
Mm.
Right? Well, what about different message features of communication? Like, what do we see with that? And so there's virtually almost nothing there. Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And because I now have a whole thing to kind of run with.
Yeah.
And so essentially over time, what I've come to try to develop is three main questions. Is one, using our communication, how do people experience emotional contagion? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so the role of social networks plays a big role into that, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea is that not, when someone talks to you about something, it's not that you are just infecting that person, but you're infecting other people who are associated with that person too, indirectly. And so, so that's the first question that will be explored. The second question is why people aren't affected by emotional contagion.
That's really interesting because sorry, I don't mean to jump into that question. First off, going back to what you said, that there isn't a lot with the verbal and the messages, I think that is something that highlights a need, right? That you can fill a void through doing this research and then bring up questions like this, why people would not be infected by, if a zombie bit you, why are you not turning into a zombie? What superpowers do you have?
Right. Yeah, which is interesting, right? And so take a situation in which someone is going through a rough time. Well, why can't you feel this person's sadness? Or why can't you feel this person's hurt?
Yeah.
Right?
My first thoughts as we're sitting here as both research nerds, I'm sure, that sort of sparked something for me. And one of the things is going to my interest of true crime is that there are probably people who don't experience emotion in the same way as other people. But that's extreme cases, like maybe sociopaths or, something like that. That might be in extreme situations.
Yeah.
But one thought I have is where people, okay, let me think of an example. Well, I'll just do it generally, and maybe there is an example that is sparked for you, is that I might think something is a big deal.
Yeah.
And you do not, right? And so you're like, why are you getting upset about that? That's stupid. And so so I don't, it could be something like being upset with something that happened at work and you come home to your partner and they're like, that's not even a big deal. That happens 10 times a day, blah, blah, blah. And so I wonder, my first thought is if there's a disagreement about whether or not someone should be even experiencing emotion. And sort of my thought on that is I don't want to tell people how they should feel. And so to me, I feel like people come across their emotion a lot of times, honestly, it's how they feel. But like you said, there can be some conscious decisions in which to, if you are really happy right now, maybe I'm like, I'm having a bad day and now I'm all hyped up because I'm talking to Lance. That might be unconscious, or maybe because I'm doing an interview, I feel like I have to mimic you in some way. You know what I mean? And so, fascinating. I'm excited.
It's interesting. And I think that, I think you're right. I mean, it's very much contextual. Mm-hmm. It's very much situational too. And I think that when we look at our different interpersonal situations, we see that depending on the environment, of course, if you are at work, the way in which we're scripted to communicate at work is much different than we are in our friendship groups.
Yeah.
Right. Which is interesting, because if it's a matter of looking at who we're communicating with and how, you would definitely see the experience of contagion either being experienced or not.
Yeah.
And so in certain situations, one profession that really is interesting to me is that of funeral directors.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
I mean, of course, you train yourself, I would assume, to not experience the grief that others are experiencing during that time. And so, in some ways, when we look at our communication, it might be a similar situation that you train yourself to not do it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you train yourself with your communication? You don't frequently communicate with certain groups of people.
Yeah.
You don't talk to certain types of people. And so the lack of communication is in a way you training yourself to not experience contagion purposefully.
Yeah, because you need to be, I would think that funeral directors, although communicate in a way that shows the appropriate care during that time, given people's grief, that it would be difficult to do that job if you take their grief on. It makes me think of when I lived in New York, I was a volunteer at a rape crisis center. And so I did like the 24/7 hotline, and I was on call and that sort of thing. And so for me, I experience empathy almost to the point that I can't see Ben Stiller movies because he's too embarrassing and it makes me uncomfortable, right? Like I experienced a lot of empathy, and what I found was that the contagion there impacted me so greatly that I was like, I don't think I have the ability to compartmentalize this. And I don't know if I'm actually helping people because of that emotional contagion that was happening. So very much different situations, maybe even, different qualities or personalities that people have too, that some people are fit to be in positions where they can take on the stress. I think of nurses, as well, or like medical staff, right?
Yeah.
Some of those individuals probably are very equipped to be able to care for people and to be able to communicate effectively. And I am not one of those people. I am a doctor of information for a reason.
Exactly. I can't.
Sorry, I can't do it.
I know that's rough. It's a rough profession, and I think it's a calling because
it's a calling. You're right.
There's so much that goes on. And so the last question.
The third question
is why people actually engage in the contagion experience. Although it may not be beneficial for them.
That was one of the questions I had for you is like, it's like, what are the benefits of emotional contagion and what are maybe the disadvantages or the problems with participating in emotional contagion? So look at this. Yeah. It's like I was psychic in some way. I don't know. Or it's just one of the questions I have.
Right. And so I think it's interesting. People, if you think about your friendship groups, right? Someone coming to you always talking about their stressor, it can be the same stressor over and over and over again that makes you upset and that you don't feel like talking about, and it has some effect on your emotional state, but you don't feel like talking about it, but you continue to do it for what reason? You want to be a good friend to the person. You want to show that you're there for them. And thinking about our needs as human beings, contagion definitely plays a role in that. Because if I'm always talking about the same stressor from a physiological standpoint, maybe you're always increasing my stress level, which isn't good. Which isn't good for me, right? And so it's interesting, and I think there's a lot more to do in this construct. So those are the three main overarching questions that I have.
I think these are great questions about this topic as you extend it, and I'm nerding out over here. I'm like, oh, I have so many questions, and it's like, but it's work that you're working on, right? So it's not like you have answers to these questions yet. This is probably...
I may have a couple answers. So.
Oh, well, we'll stay tuned for that, because I do have a couple questions, though, for you about the topic, and maybe we can delve it a little bit more in how emotional contagion applies to friendship, because you sort of mentioned it, just now, that if you apply it to a friendship group, you're trying to be a good friend, but at the same time, I would think that would be really frustrating to talk about the same stressor, and you give advice, and then if they don't take it, and then they still come talking to you advice. So I think that there's a level of there's some connection to social support in the sense of the types of supports that might be required, that talking about the same stressor and over again. Maybe it's emotional support they're only looking for, where someone else might be in an informational support mode and they're like, all right, this is what you need to do. And then it's like, that isn't what's done. And then I wonder, though, also if it has an impact on satisfaction in a friendship. But it also reminds me of secret keeping or sharing secrets with friends, and that actually sometimes, you telling someone else a secret can be it's a relief, right? To be able to share a secret. But that doesn't mean it doesn't add stress for someone else to hold your secret.
Interesting.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And so then that is something that is carried on, and it's because of qualities of friendship. So I guess those are sort of the thoughts I had, but maybe this is backing up the truck a little bit. How do you see emotional contagion? Because you study friendship, so where were your thoughts of emotional contagion in friendship groups? Like, what do you see happening there, or why did you choose friendships to look at emotional contagion? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I chose friendships for emotional contagion because of my interest in social networks. And so friendship networks are an important part in the role of emotional experiences. I'm actually getting ready to start another project right now where I'm looking at the strength of ties among the friendship network. So either you have really close ties or really weak ties, and the experience of emotional contagion that way. And also in that same project, I'm looking at the frequency of communication. So just because you have a strong tie with your best friend doesn't mean that you talk to them as frequently. Especially when it comes to a college student situation. If you get a bunch of college students who are away from home, perhaps their best friends are at different universities. Sure, they may be really close, but they don't talk as much. But also, you can have acquaintances too, which aren't necessarily considered friends. But, so you have these weak ties. You may talk to this acquaintance frequently. And so the goal is to see how the emotional contagion differs across those different conditions that I will assign people to in the survey, right? And so that's number one with social networks and friendship. But number two is one's position in their friendship group plays a role in the experience of emotional contagion. And so are you the most influential person in your friendship group? Because the idea is that when we look at this idea of centrality in a network, the most influential individual, ideally, in theory, would have the greatest possibility of infecting others with their emotions. So if you are central in the network, you likely have the greatest ability to diffuse emotions in a network too.
That's really interesting. And of course, it immediately made me think of the comedian Dane Cook. He had a bit about friendships where they would always talk, oh God, here comes Brian. And and so if no one's saying that, there's always one person in a group that, like, in his bit, he kind of talks about it changes the group negatively. Here comes Brian. Who invited Brian? And he's always like, if you're not having these conversations with other people, you're the Brian. And so that might be like a negative, like that. I would think that given position in the group, that you might have greater power to infect people more positively, and that there are some people who can infect the group more negatively. Right?
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, if you think about, NCA is coming up.
Yes.
The National Communications Association. Our annual conference.
It's in Salt Lake City this year, correct?
Yes.
I've never been.
Me neither. Never had a reason to go to Utah. But
you do now.
Right. And so what's interesting is if you go to NCA and you think about how many people are at this conference, and you think about how many people are gravitating toward others at panels, at presentations, at at the bar,
Mm-hmm.
at restaurants, wherever. So one individual who immediately comes to mind as being really central in our networks is Walid Afifi.
Oh,
right?
Walid. Now,
Yes.
let's just pause for a second. Walid was my advisor for the first couple years I was at Penn State, and he was at University of Iowa when you were there. Is that correct? So we both know Walid.
Yes, which is interesting, right? So you and I are directly connected to Walid, right?
Yes.
And so, which means that we're then connected to each other.
Yes.
But how many people are also connected to him
Everyone.
who we also have friends of, right? And so, for everyone.
Everyone.
and so if you map this network of who's friends with Walid Afifi, you would find that there are plenty of people in the network, but there are also overlapping ties in this network as well. And so, and it's a really interesting area of study, the idea of the study of the networks, because it is an important role in our relationships. Yeah. And particularly when we look at emotional contagion, there's a researcher at Yale. His name is Nicholas Christakis. Mm-hmm. He looked at emotional contagion among groups of females, or individuals who became a larger group of females who were attempting to lose weight. Yeah. And so essentially what he found was, over the course of time, those who were 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 degrees of separation from an individual who had negative emotional experiences, the less likely they were to lose weight. Wow. Which is interesting, right? Because it's the idea that our emotional experience don't just affect us, but affect those 2 and 3 and 4 degrees away from us. Yeah. And so, that work is, to me, just very fascinating. Yeah. And so, but when we look at communication, I think we can do the same type of thing. Yeah. You know, one thing that comes to mind is, in my position as a PhD student who's almost on the job market. Woohoo! Right? Hire him! Correct. Please do. I will come to your school. So the thing about it is, if you look at it, a lot of the talk about the academic job market is very much negative. Yes. Right? And so I wonder, in a situation like that, you know, when you have people who are talking negatively about a situation, how the experience of contagion not only from one's advisor affecting the advisee, but how that advisee affects their peers all around them, right? And maybe even go further to the students that they might teach in the classrooms who might be interested in going to graduate school. It can continue on. And it continues on, And I think that's a really excellent point about, negative sort of infection or negative contagion. And I would like to point out that we haven't mapped out the friendships of Walid Afifi, although I think that would be amazing. I might need to let's put that on Facebook and see if we can't. Let's do it. But I would say that there is a lot of positivity around Walid, and that you mentioned who gravitates to who, that they gravitate to him because he's charismatic and it's kind of got a loud laugh like me. But he's also, I think, inclusive, interested in what people have to say, does great work. There's lots of qualities about him individually that people gravitate to. And so I think that could be interesting to look at, is how someone's individual, who they are as a person, impacts whether or not people gravitate to them and how they might be able to infect them emotionally. Yeah, it's interesting. So going back to the last question I have, why people actually engage in the emotional experience of others and thus experience contagion, although it may not be beneficial for them. Yes. One example that comes to mind is in communication is Trump. Yes. Right. the thing about it is, when you look at those who follow him, like his strong base,
supporters, yep,
they tend to use the same types of arguments that he uses, the same types of verbiage that he uses, and so it's not. And those things, and the idea is that it's not beneficial for them at the relational level, because they can lose friends, they can lose ties amongst other people,
or they could be strained in some way,
right? And so it's interesting, and I think I don't have a direct answer to that, to why people engage in it despite it not being beneficial for them. I mean, the thing is, you can also not have a positive emotional contagion experience, and it may not be beneficial for you either. So, I mean, think about college students who are always hanging out with each other, who are less productive in the classroom.
The episode that just came out a couple weeks ago called Success Squads, if I can say it. There's lots of S's in there. Success Squad. It's about having people around you that are going to help you do better. And sometimes we have people around us who encourage us to participate in behaviors or do things or not do things that we would normally do. And so I think, it's like, why do that? And, I think it goes back to you talking about that this is situational or contextual, and that, for example, with Trump supporters, it might be because they have a strong interest in not having someone of the usual political fare representing them, right? Like Trump is completely anti everything else that well, I mean, if you go back in history, he has some similarities to other people. But just in general, I think that is one of the reasons why people voted for him, is because he doesn't appear to be like the other politicians. And so I think participating in it now, no matter what happens, is a way to for them to show that they are consistent and that they are. You don't want to have cognitive dissonance. You don't want to be like, I'm a vegetarian, and then you're over here eating a Big Mac, like, it's like you're trying to not have maybe pride be hurt, or having to go back and say that maybe you're wrong about something. That it's like staying true and loyal and strong and consistent. However, if we look at college students hanging out with friends who maybe encourage them not to, say, study for an exam or to go out, like, why do you need to study? Let's go to this bar tonight, that sort of thing. It might be about, like we talked about before, being a good friend. It reminds me of Brant Burleson's work on the functional perspective, that a function of a friend is to be there and go do things and hang out and that sort of thing. But also in college, depending on the year, it could be about fitting in, right? So as we're in September and we're in a new academic year, thinking about all the people who are trying to find their footing on campus, where they fit in, who their friends are going to be, that participating in it is a way to make bonds and connections and to appear as if you fit in or you do fit in. So those are some of my thoughts, but I think it depends on the context, right? A political context versus a whole life transition into a place where you'll be for work, life, living, everything, right?
Yeah. All those things are definitely important. And like I said, I mean, when we look at our friendship networks, like I said, we see strength of ties as playing an important role. Just because you're friends with someone, or friends with 3 to 4 or 5 or 6 other people in one group, doesn't mean that there's an equal amount of strength of tie between all of you, right? Because there's likely to at least be one person in that group whom you may not necessarily have a bad relationship with, but someone whose the strength of that relationship is not as great as another person, right? And so like I said, when we look at our networks, moving beyond the dyad, I think,
which is 2 people, as a reminder.
Yes, 2 people. Moving beyond the dyad, I think, one, is essential for interpersonal communication research, but also 2, the study of emotional contagion. And I think that once you move beyond the dyad, a whole world of possibility opens up.
Yeah.
I mean, because you have, again, much of the network theory is based on the idea that, like people with, n degrees of separation
Yeah.
have the ability to influence each other.
Yeah.
Right. And so, since that's what I think about that. In terms of moving forward, in terms of study designs that could be beneficial. Of course, you can do your experimental designs, which I have 2 of those going on right now.
Yeah.
And I'm a quantitative scholar, by the way. So,
numbers, statistics.
Yeah. And so that's where the experimental designs come in at.
Yeah.
But I do think there could be some qualitative work done with emotional contagion too. I do think there's some features of it that could be explored better using qualitative design as opposed to quantitative design.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I'm also someone who's quantitatively focused, which is not a surprise for those of you in academics and are familiar with Michigan State's communication program, or Walida Fifi at Penn State, who I had at Penn State, that I also focus on that, right? So that I can see what you're trying to do, but I also believe that there is, because you have this area that we sort of don't have information about, and you're developing an area that qualitative work can be very helpful. And one of the things I think that it can be helpful with is sort of people's reasoning for things, coming up with the messages that they use, finding out sort of what people might be doing that we just don't know yet, right? So when this situation happens, what do you do? Or when your friend is experiencing emotion, what is your sort of go-to? How do you respond to that? And so I think, but then it's getting at, like you said, the conditions of frequency of talk, strength of ties. Like that's where I think you're starting to look at experimental conditions, or you have hypotheses that need to be tested. And so to me, any researchers listening, young researchers, established researchers, I think we all say it depends on the questions that we're asking, what you're going to do, and that both are quite valuable. And so that's, I mean, it's exciting because there's so much for you to do. You better get to work.
Yeah. I know.
Sorry.
I got so this one study design, the one that's on frequency of communication and strength of tide.
Yeah.
That one is a 2-study project where study 1 is looking at things at the dyadic level.
Yeah.
And then study 2 is measuring some of the same things at the extradyadic level. And so where I will assign them to be either at the the goal is to compare whether we contagion among the group, or at the dyadic level. And so I'm going to randomly assign people to all those different conditions. And then in study 2, the goal is to measure the centrality, the different types of centrality that can be experienced at the group level. Yeah. And so it's interesting, right? I mean, I think that like I said, there's a ton of work to be done. And so one thing that I'm trying to do now is not only make empirical claims with the data set, but to make theoretical claims too. Yeah. Because I have to at this point. I mean, it really, I don't think I can really move forward without making theoretical claims. Yeah. And so it's interesting stuff. And so I think that there's plenty to do. There's plenty to do, which is a good thing. This is what you want, right? Yeah, this is what I say. This is what you want as a researcher, because Lance is a PhD student who will be looking for jobs soon, and so people out there should hire him because of all the great work he's doing, and he has a lot of promise because he has a research program that's going to keep him busy for many years to come. I appreciate the plug because that is correct. This agenda is definitely not going to be finished in
It's not like you do a study and then you're like, well, this is solved, right?
No.
You're trying to find support, and that's going to develop more questions, and it just continues. So that's the good news.
And the good news is also with that is I think I want to use this research to not just benefit myself, but to see how we can actually address certain issues, right? With this research. And I think, one, that's the direction that many interpersonal scholars are going in right now. That's one. Two, I think universities are trying to make that approach as well to say, what can this be done to impact the community?
Yeah.
Right? Because that gives the university, press, and that gives them, visibility, right? And so, I think that when we see these different things, so I see this problem that exists, and I know my construct is applicable to that. What can we do? Like, do we need to develop interventions based around emotional contagion? Do we need to? And I think that, moving forward, that's certainly a possibility to see, contagion is always going to occur.
Yeah.
That's nothing.
It's not going to go away.
It's not going to go away, but we can change, but we may be able to change, what is occurring and how it's occurring and what is going on. And so I think, moving forward, I want this research to benefit other people too.
Yeah. One of the things that when I think of research, yes, it helps me as a scholar myself advance in my career. It gives a good name to my department, the college that I'm in, and the university that I'm at. But most importantly, and I think nearly all researchers will agree, that the reason why we're doing this is to answer questions and solve problems because it helps people. And that is something that it was a strong message that I received in my education is you talk about research is me search, right? Like that somehow people are connected to the research. Like, I want to know this because I want to know it for myself. And then, and then, people will say, well, so what? How does it help other people? Where is the practical implications? What can you do for the people who are in the world around you? How can you help people that emotional contagion is most dangerous for? For example, in middle schools, is emotional contagion something that we see with bullying, right? And that is a real world problem that impacts kids every single day, especially we're back in school. Is there a way that because of understanding emotional contagion, we can understand some of the issues that happen in schools or outside of school, and we might be able to diminish it or to really give students a bunch of tools in their tool belts in which to solve the problems that they're experiencing? And so that's why I do what I do. And I think that, but you also have to consider that I work for a university who's looking for how we can reach out to the community. As I go up for tenure, that I have a program that is going to help advance my career as a professor. But it really, in the long run, is who does it help out the most?
Right.
The people are experiencing the issues that are related to the topics that we study. So I think that there's so much practical implications for this that it can be applied to so many things. And I have a question for you. And after that sort of speech about community engagement and helping other people, I think this is something that we could help understand what's going on or explain it, but it's probably not an issue that people are going to care about.
Yeah.
Okay. So, because it has to, do you watch the TV show Big Brother?
I used to.
So you're familiar with it, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So on the show, I call it the survivor that's in a house and not on an island, right? That they have food provided for them, but they're participating in challenges and different things like that, and there's alliances, and someone gets voted out each week, and so on and so forth. I am probably one of the only people who still watches it. Shout out to Julie Chen. Love her. I'm a big fan of Big Brother. I think I've only missed one season. And dedication. Talk about consistency and loyalty, right? Okay. And so One of the things about the show that I find particularly fascinating as a communication person is how people develop relationships and how they might use those relationships to get ahead in the game, how they use relationships to help themselves win. When are relationships strong ties or weak ties, and using the games, and that they wouldn't do certain things to people because they have a strong connection, and they would backstab someone that they don't have a strong connection with. But there's always alliances, and one of the things that you see on Big Brother is people are excited to make their alliance name, and it's usually something stupid, and you're like, I think you should workshop that name a little bit. But so there's an alliance this season called Level 6. That includes 5 members because they pretty much got out one of their own members, Rachel, which was really uncool. But one of the things that you could say is that they had a weak tie with her. And so one of the things that I think you see in the show is that you have an alliance, but within that, not all 6 of them, for example, are going to make it to the end. And at this point, not all 5 of them are going to make it to the end. And so what I see with emotional contagion is, if you will allow me to continue this example, is that there are people who have alliances. It'll be 2 people. And Tyler and Angela this season are 2 people. They're a dyad within this level 6 alliance that have really strong ties. So I think if Angela was upset or Tyler was upset, that they would experience emotional contagion, and that it is possible for the other people in the alliance to experience it. Okay? That's one thing, that they're more likely with the strong ties. However, I think they have people in the alliance or other people in the house they have weak ties with. So what they do is they fake emotional contagion, right? So if someone is upset, Haley, for example, who is not on their side of the house, oh my God, are you okay? That's so upsetting. And, the mimicking and the statements they might make. And then they're doing it because of the game. And then they cut to their diary room confessions. And this is great for us, even though just a second ago you see them experiencing, and I'm using air quotes, experiencing the emotion that Haley is truly experiencing at that time. And so my question for you, that relates to what you're studying, is I wonder in that project that you're doing, that weak ties versus strong ties, if people are more likely to fake or consciously use emotional contagion when they have weak ties with someone because it's critical to being polite or kind, or it's going to help them in some way, and that when it's a strong tie and it's someone that you care about, that you might unconsciously experience emotional contagion. And that's like a 10-minute example of, I just was thinking about it, like, this is something that every day I watch during the sun. Well, it's 3 days a week, but you can watch the live feeds. These are connections that people are making, that they're forced connections in some way, but they will end up being some real connections. They'll end up being some fake connections. And I think you see a lot of emotional contagion playing out. And so you might not watch Big Brother anymore, but I'm telling you, anyone who watches Big Brother is going to be like, totally, I see this emotional, faking it, having it for real.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I never thought about that. Perhaps the idea of deceptive emotional contagion.
Yeah.
Maybe that can be a thing.
Here, look, another area of research that you can continue. I just added 5 years to your career.
I appreciate it. You've added like 20 more years. And so, but I think that, people, people can fake it. I think in the same way that you can fake anything. But, and honestly, I'm not sure if, and I can't think of anything that comes to mind of people like faking that emotional experience. I know there's
a little bit about it because, for example, models might have to go down a runway and they have shoes that are 2 sizes too small, and there's the stress that's going on backstage, but they can't communicate it, right? And so they cannot allow that contagion, so they have to fake that there's nothing going on and that they're not in pain and that they're not upset or whatever the case. They just have to go out there and do it. So I think the emotional research has probably alluded to it, but maybe it's another step in terms of the contagion part.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I mean, I do think that may go back to the idea, may touch on some of the parts of the second question, why people don't experience contagion.
Yes.
You know, and an attempt to, they don't experience it, but they put on this show in front of other people as if they do, right? Again, depending on whom we're talking to, right? We may want to actually show that we empathize with them. For what reason? Maybe it's to avoid an argument, or to avoid conflict, or to avoid any other relational damaging situation. Right. So I think that maybe in some cases people do act as if they are going through it in an attempt to avoid certain things. And maybe, again, that's maybe something I could put like in my discussion section of this paper now, is, sure, when we are looking at our friendship groups and having conversations about different things, well, in particular, like this study is looking at, I give them a scenario about a student, whether it's a best friend or an acquaintance based upon the condition.
Yep.
If it's someone in their class, their best friend or their acquaintance, is telling them about how they just failed the midterm exam, how they went to see the TA, and how they believe that they're going to fail out of their major because their major requires a 3.0 and they have a 2.95.
Yeah.
And so they probably want to fail the class, which means they get kicked out the major, which means they lose their scholarship, which means they don't have money to pay for school, which means they have to drop out.
Yeah.
So that's the scenario, right? And so
that is like a lot of carts happening in front of that horse.
Right. And so maybe in the acquaintance scenario, I mean, maybe it may be the case that people don't, you don't care.
Yeah.
Right. And you may try to empathize for that, with that person just because out of politeness, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
You may try to, act as if you do feel what they feel. Which is interesting. You can take politeness theory and run all that through that. Right. And so, to your point is people may deceptively experience contagion because of, whatever reason.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, I went through this whole thing about there's lots of issues that there can be practical implications for, like bullying. And I'm sure Big Brother's going-ons on that TV show are at the bottom of people's concern list, but it was just something that it made me think of it. And it certainly could be applied to a lot of different situations. But I just wonder, I think this is an important area in which to study because, like you said, emotion contagion isn't going to go away. And there's lots of questions, 3 of which you've described here, that need to be answered or could be answered. And so I'm wondering if you can share with us sort of where you're at now in terms of, do you have any answers? Or what advice would you give, or what are some of the takeaways at this point in your study of emotional contagion in friendship groups and social networks?
Yeah. So I would say, I think in terms of advice, I think the idea of valence, whether the contagion is positive or negative, maybe too simplistic or too elementary of a guide or advice. I think that the best thing to think about is, how this contagion is going to benefit me in the long run, how it's going to benefit my well-being, right? And so, but then to also think about how it will benefit the well-being of others around me, right? And so, because again, contagion doesn't just affect me; it affects others, and affects people who are 2 or 3 or 4 degrees of separation from me, right? And so, I think understanding how your emotional experiences do influence your social network is very important to think about. And so, I think that's the main kind of thing I would say in terms of advice.
Yeah. I would think that some people don't realize that what they're saying or doing or communicating their emotion impacts other people. But even as individuals who both of us are in the classroom, even if you have one person come in and they're in a bad mood, it can impact the entire class. And not just that class session, if it could change the culture of the class for the entire semester, depending on the communication of it. So, and that is not just, thinking about how it impacts yourself, but it's the people who sit around you, people you might not even know, your teacher. And I think that is something that sometimes we think about ourselves a lot, right? In some situations. And other times I don't think we think about our impact on other people at all. And so I think that is great advice, is how we might impact other people, especially our friendship groups, in terms of our emotional experience and expression.
Yeah, it's very important. And I think it's the same thing when you, again, you think about college students, right? I mean, I'm not sure, I'm sure they may be told this in an inadvertent way, but I'm not sure if they're told, during orientation, be careful of how you communicate your emotions to other people, because it can affect others around you, And so, one idea that I have, which I would love to do one day, if I get enough money and enough time, would be to look at college roommates, right? The idea is that, okay, so if I, because my roommate has, is communicating, whatever to me in my dormitory building, then then I pass that along to other people and other people and other people. Now we have this emotional contagion in one particular dorm building. Yeah. But it can spread across dormitory buildings. Yeah. And but I think the more deliverables from that is to assess okay, so what are the academic outcomes to a contagion, right? And so do we see, because people are experiencing negative emotional contagion, that people are dropping classes at a higher rate, or at the end of the semester, are they having lower GPAs?
Maybe even less retention, even staying.
Or even staying at the university. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so I think that, again, there's a lot to do with this. I got a whole career.
Well, and I was also thinking, what you're talking about here, for me, because roommates are people we live with. And my belief is that everyone should feel comfortable in their own home, that if there is negative emotional contagion in that space and they don't feel comfortable there, that is going to infect every single part of their life. And then like zombies, they can little bites throughout, and it's going to spread. It's going to spread.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty much, the metaphor of contagion is just that. It's going to spread. It's like a virus. And so you take the flu virus, for example, you have different stages of it, right? That you as the individual experience, right? Yeah. And so essentially what I've tried to do with the communication work is to essentially depict how this process works through a model that I'm trying to test, right? Yeah. And so it's called the model of communicative emotional contagion, right? And so basically it's a stage model where I suggest that the communication of emotion is the virus, right? And so that's the virus, and then the second stage is actually one susceptibility to emotional contagion, and then the third phase is the emotional contagion itself, which is the infection, and then I propose the fourth phase is called recovery response, where I argue that people are trying to decide how they are going to recover socially from this contagion experience. And so are you going to hang around this person more? Or are you going to distance yourself? Are you going to use more avoidant communication behaviors with this person to not get infected again? Yeah. Right? And so, yeah.
I think this model is really important because it can help you understand the process. And then the recovery response to me feels very much like, here's how the research can help people make better choices or communicate in the future, because it is like, do I stay friends with this person? If not, how do I end that friendship, that sort of thing. And speaking of college roommates or being on college campuses, and to add one more thing to your to-do list, because I know you don't got anything on it, is that this seems like a program that you could do on University of Iowa's campus for incoming students or just throughout the semester, and talk about the skills of, or like awareness of one's own emotional contagion and what can happen in emotional contagion. So it's one of those things where, you can help people sort of figure out what emotional contagion is. They can be aware of themselves, how they communicate with other people, what sort of complications that can come up, and then how they can resolve it. And so that is getting at resolving the issues that emotional contagion causes people in their life. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. There's a lot of cool stuff to be done. So it's a lot of it's contingent on grant money. And so...
Get him a job and give him grant money.
Right. Yes. And
wait, where's my wand? I have my Harry Potter wand over here.
I appreciate it. If you could wand me up a job, that'd be great.
I'll see what I can do in my potions class. No, I don't know.
I appreciate it. I mean, it's like I said, it's very much contingent upon grant money, because a lot of these things I want to test, during the course of time, right?
Yeah.
And so we look at more longitudinal studies, in different waves of experiences among these sample populations. I think that, those are the things I want to do moving forward. Yeah. Because, I do want to see, like, okay, if I place this intervention among this group of people, will it change things? Right?
Yeah. And that's important to know, and in what ways that they could be changed, or what is the most effective way for change. It's good stuff. I like where you're headed, and of course, I know that myself and listeners would love to hear updates as you go along. So if you ever, as your research is finishing and you're moving on to the next project, and you are so inclined to update me with any findings, we can do like a little Lance corner, like Lance Contagion corner, and update.
There you go. I'll do that.
All right, that's great. It's always great to talk to you.
Great talking to you.
When I listened back to this chat with Lance, I kept thinking of new ideas or other questions that I wanted to ask him, or I think that emotional contagion can address. And I kept thinking, nerd, you're a nerdy nerd. And you know what? That's okay. I think that our conversation was both nerdy and lively about a topic that really applies to a lot. And I think Lance and I demonstrated that emotional contagion is something that exists. It's not going away. And it can be seen through politics, friendships, bullying, retention in college, and even one of my personal favorites, Big Brother, right? That we have to think about that emotion can infect other people, much like the zombie apocalypse or like the flu, as Lance described. I look forward to learning more about what Lance discovers, how his research may help us make decisions about coping when we're dealing with the effects of emotional contagion, especially in friendship. And I think that my interests line up here, and I think that's why Lance and I get along so well, both as people and as researchers, is because we think similarly and have similar interests. And I think that my interest with being a supportive friend or communicating social support is important here, because I think that if your friend is sad and you're infected with sadness, that you might provide a different type of social support than if your friend is sad and you can't experience it. You're not sad. You're like, that is stupid to be sad about. I don't understand why you're sad. Or you're in such a good mood that you don't want anyone else to bring you down. Then what type of support are you going to give? Is it going to be effective support for your friend at that time? Is that the good time to actually be interacting with your friend who's going through some sort of emotion? Or might you choose a type of support that could be problematic and could put a strain on the friendship at that given time? Additionally, doing this podcast has really got me thinking about something that is, I think, critical to why making friends is so hard and this idea of rejection and loneliness. And so it makes me wonder if the emotion behind rejection can be contagious. So for example, in like a friendship group, if one person doesn't like someone else, does that infect the group and then they all reject this person that they don't like? Is it the fact that loneliness is something that can be contagious and that it actually steers people away from them because they are then infected with that emotion and it makes it harder to get beyond it and to actually make friends? I feel like I'm just made of so many questions that my question list is probably longer than Lance's to-do list. So I think it just means that we're going to have to continue this conversation. You know, Lance, you got lots to do. When you cross some of those items off your to-do list, please let us know. We want to hear some updates. And then we also probably need to have an updated chit-chat about all the nerdy questions and scenarios I've come up with since. But friends, I would love to hear about your experiences of emotional contagion in your friendships. Has there been an experience of positive contagion that was really meaningful in your friendship or made a difference to your day or to something that was going on in your life? Or was there an occurrence of negative contagion that caused problems for your friendship? Or was there even a time when you might have felt like obligated to experience contagion or to fake contagion because you thought it was the best thing for your friend or your friendship at the time? You can send me your stories to bestforeverspod@gmail.com or check out the surveys tab of the podcast webpage, www.bestforeverspod.com. Just keep in mind, I'm not nosy. I either love to geek out on friendship or get to the heart of the issues that challenge us the most. And I think hearing about people's experiences of emotional contagion in their friendships can bring to life the questions that Lance is starting to answer, starting to analyze with his research. And I think it'd be a great way to get him back on the podcast is that I can share those stories of yours with him and we can talk about it together. So be sure to send those in. So listen, y'all, this is super exciting. It is nearly my 1-year podiversary. I started Best Forevers on International Podcast Day in 2017, which is September 30th. And so I'm almost to 1 whole year, 1 whole 365 days of podcasting. It is amazing how much has happened in the last year, how many connections I've made with other podcasters and with listeners, and how close I would say my working relationship is with my editor, who I love so much, and just all the topics that we've been able to discuss on Facebook or on the podcast and the people I've been able to have on. A year ago, there's no way I would have ever thought that Gareth Reynolds would have been on my podcast or that I would have been able to talk to Kayleen Schaefer about her book, Text Me When You Get Home, and that all of these individuals who've been on the podcast would be so open and willing to share with me their friendship stories. And so for that, I'm very grateful. So for this month, I wanted to really reflect what this podcast has been about. And I think starting with my roots in research with Lance in this episode is a great way to start my anniversary, my podiversary month. But upcoming, I'm super excited to cover 3 other topics that are near and dear to my heart and that I've mentioned a lot on the podcast. The first one is Anne of Green Gables. The book means so much to me, but even more, the movie means so much to me. So I'm making Claire watch Anne of Green Gables before reading the book, and then we're going to talk about it, and we're going to have an Anne of Green Gables movie viewing, and I'm going to document it. I'll post the extras on Patreon, and you'll be able to see them on social media, and then she's never seen it, she's never read it, but I want to see what her take on friendship will be based on this book and why she thinks it's so important to me, and then at a later date, we'll analyze the book. The second topic that's going to come up is my best friend, Kate Cosgrove, who is a wonderful supporter and has been the visual guru of Best Forevers, all the wonderful logos and images and everything that she's created for swag and for merchandise has just been a perfect representation. And I think that might be why we're friends. I feel like she just gets me and she gets what I'm trying to do. And then I'll look at what she's made and I'm crying. Not a loud cry, but a cry because it's so beautiful and there isn't anything else that I need to ask her. I know that she has put everything into it and she knows that this is what I'm looking for. We just get each other. But another thing that we get is lifetime. we love us some Lifetime movies. And so Kate and I are going to treat all of you with our friendship over one of the greatest Lifetime movies of all time. I don't want to spoil that yet. There'll be a teaser. But Kate and I are going to watch a Lifetime movie, and then we're going to talk about it and why it means so much to our friendship to love on Lifetime. And then finally, and this is very exciting for me, is being able to interview my research hero of friendship research, and that is Dr. William Rollins. Bill Rollins will be joining me to talk about what made him first decide to study friendship. Why does he think friendship matters? What has he learned through all the research that he's done over the years? And what advice does he have for all of us about friendship? I am super excited. And then I will also have an interview coming up in early October with friends Mitch and Zach, who were the ones who told me to start the podcast. And so I think this really represents my podcast and the year anniversary to have Anna Green Gables, to have my best friend, to have my favorite researcher, and to have the two people who told me to start the podcast all be on to celebrate 1 year of Best Forevers. I can't think of anything better other than having you all join me. And so if you would like to share anything about your experience with Best Forevers, what you think about the podcast, if you want to celebrate the anniversary in some way, you can send me messages or audio clips for the anniversary episode, which will come out at the end of September. And you can email those to bestforeverspod@gmail.com. So if you like what you have in your ear holes, there's a few things you can do. I'd love to have you follow Best Forevers on social media. You can find the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Best Forevers Pod. And I'm Dr. Alysa Lucas, endearingly obnoxiously loud on Twitter. No, that's not one whole name. I'm at Dr. Alysa Lucas. But since I'm a loud crier, I would just like to clarify that I'm endearingly obnoxious and loud. Social media is a great way to follow podcast updates, and you can get involved with discussions and other items related to friendship. I really look forward to us connecting on social media. And if you care about friendships like I do and want to support Best Forevers, you might consider supporting the movement to love on our friends more on patreon.com/Best Forevers Pod. There's lots of cool perks and goals. You can check out what you would get, all the extra videos on Patreon, like me making Claire watch Anna Green Gables. And if you become a patron, you become a purple shirt friend, or what I like to call friends with benefits. And I would love to call each and every one of you my friend with benefit. So thank you to all my lovely patrons. I appreciate all the support, and I look forward to any new patrons that are joining us on the movement. And as we enter my 1 year anniversary, I'd like to point out that one of my primary goals on Patreon is to raise money to acquire benches, a wooden bench, to give that bench some tender love and care, maybe some paint, and then actually etch people's names into the bench. Those of you who have donated, your name and your friend's name. And when it's ready to go, to donate it to a local school as a buddy bench so that we can encourage young people to talk to each other, maybe to diminish loneliness, maybe to embrace inclusion and diversity and acceptance. And basically what I'd like to do is this, before 2019, I'd like to have my first bench all completed and done and ready to be donated to a school. That bench was donated to me by Peggy, Sarah's mother. Sarah's been on a couple of the episodes, and I'm so grateful to have my first bench. Now I'm working on getting it painted and updated and that sort of thing. And so if you would like to donate $1 or $5 to this bench and have your name or you and your friend's name etched into the bench, you can do so at patreon.com/Best Forevers Pod by becoming a patron. If you'd like to make a one-time donation, you can PayPal me at paypal.me/Best Forevers Pod. Any one-time donations will go directly to this bench or to the next bench, because the idea is that I continue getting these benches, getting them ready, and then donating them to schools so that we can really combat loneliness and rejection and really embrace and celebrate friendships. Finally, thank you for listening to Best Forevers. I appreciate every single listen, like, follow, post, retweet, and share with a friend. Please subscribe, rate, and review Best Forevers. It is so helpful to the podcast so that other people can find Best Forevers, but then it also warms my friend-loving heart. This week's promo is from the podcast Wife's Tales, which I love to have in my rotation of podcast listening. This podcast does not fail to excite me, shock me, or take me down the twisty turns of the mysteries that are the myths, folklore, and legends of our world. Of our crazy, crazy world. You must get Jenny and Shelby in your ear holes immediately because you're missing out on all the twisty, twisty, twisty stuff. So come for the craziness, but stay for the ladies because they are awesome and have an awesome friendship. So be sure to check them out and subscribe, rate, and review Wife's Tales. So until next time, friends, think about how your emotion impacts your friends and their well-being, because without our friends, who would we be?
Hey guys.
Hey y'all.
I'm Shelby.
I'm Jenny.
And we are Wife's Tales.
Yeah, we're a weekly podcast all about dark mysteries, twisted legends, spooky folklore, and creepy creatures.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can find us anywhere podcasts are played pretty much.
Yeah.
Y'all keep it twisty.
That's right. Bye.